Welcome to the Field Dynamics podcast. We're here to facilitate inspiring dialogues about the nature of consciousness across disciplines, communities, and practitioners, all with a holistic perspective.
From energy healing to somatic therapies, from neuroscience to meditation, we believe the most interesting things happen at the boundaries of disciplines.
I'm Christabel.
And I'm Keith.
Thanks for joining us today and enjoy the episode. Okay, hello and welcome. We're here today with Eileen McKusick. Eileen McKusick is a pioneering researcher, writer, inventor, practitioner, educator, and speaker in the fields of therapeutic sound, the human biofield, and electric health. She has an MA in integrative education and has been studying the effects of sound on the human body and its electromagnetic system since 1996. She is the originator of the sound therapy method Biofield Tuning, with over 2,000 students trained worldwide since 2010. The founder of the Biofield Tuning Institute, which conducts grant-funded, IRB-approved, and peer-reviewed studies on the human biofield, and author of the award-winning, best-selling book, Tuning the Human Biofield, Healing with Vibrational Sound Therapy from 2014, as well as Electric Body, Electric Health, published by St. Martin's Press in 2021. Firstly, welcome, Eileen. It's a true pleasure to have you with us here today.
Great to be here.
For our listeners who aren't familiar with your work, I just wanted to take a moment to define biofield tuning, which is a modality based on vibrational medicine view of health that enables practitioners to identify and work with both mind and memory through an interaction with a person's biological field or biofield. And the biofield here is being defined as a complex organizing information or energy field that is engaged in the generation, maintenance, and regulation of biological functioning. So the first question I had, Eileen, or we had, is that we understand you're self-taught in the art of using tuning forks. And I wonder if as a starting point, you'd be happy to share with us the first time you picked up a tuning fork and the circumstances of that introduction and what exactly you experienced.
So I first picked up tuning forks in 1996 after seeing them in a catalog, Tuning Forks for Healing. And this was after I had been reading a bunch of books on the use of color and sound and music in medicine. And the idea that really everything is vibration, that we appear solid, things appear solid, but really that's an artifact of our perception, and that ultimately everything is just waves. And so it just seemed very logical to me to treat waves with waves. And when I ordered those tuning forks, I had a part-time massage therapy practice. And I remember asking people if they wanted to be guinea pigs and let me experiment with them. And everyone was game. And really right from the beginning, I started observing things with the tuning forks that I really didn't expect. You know, I thought, oh, I have this tuning fork and it's in the note of C. So if I activate it and I hold it over somebody's body, it's going to sound like a C. It's just going to be this sort of objective sound input. And that's not what happened at all. I discovered that when I held it over different areas of the body, it would sound differently. Like if I was holding it over an area where someone had sharp pain, that the tone would actually go sharp. And that I could hear it, and that my person on the table could hear it. And if I kept on activating the fork and holding it over that area, that after just a little bit, it would no longer sound sharp. It would sound like a C again. And then what would happen was the person, let's say they had shoulder pain, they would get off the table and say, wow, my shoulder doesn't hurt. And so that was kind of amazing. Like I didn't expect that. I didn't know what to expect, because I was just sort of jumping in blindly. And so what happened was people would come back and they'd say, I felt really good after you did that sound thing on me. Do that sound thing again. And so my massage practice ended and I just started working with the tuning forks. But at the time, early on, because I had been informed by all this information about color therapy and about music therapy, I started to incorporate other things. Like I got 100-watt light bulbs in every color of the spectrum and a gooseneck lamp. And so I would kind of evaluate where people's energy was low, and I'd hook up the light and put it on there. And then I had a surround sound stereo with a subwoofer under the table, and I would play different musical selections based on what I felt that they needed. And it was pretty intense. But then I ended up moving my office to a place where I couldn't have the subwoofer. And to me, like, if I couldn't have the subwoofer under the table, there was no point in doing music. And then the lamp broke, and I never replaced it. And so I just ended up sticking with the tuning forks. And it's been 26 years now that, and I haven't put them down. You know, it's interesting because I was thinking that I'm one of those people that picks up stuff and then puts them down. Like, I picked up the guitar a few years ago, played it for a little while, put it back down. You know, I'm always sort of curious about things and picking things up and putting things down, but I've never put down tuning forks because they've been so fascinating and surprising and interesting to me.
Amazing. And many people listening to this might not be familiar with the practice of biofield tuning, but utilizing physical tuning forks around the body, in the field around the body, to initiate a healing process. And obviously you discovered this on your own. And amazingly, like you said, 26 years later, look what you've done with a whole modality. So what is happening with resonating these forks in the field around the body? What's actually happening to shift their field, to shift their health, their physical pain? What's going on with that?
So I think there's a few things in play. And honestly, it took me a long time to figure out what was going on. It was all very confusing and intriguing for a long time. And I ended up, having to do a deep dive academically. I discovered the term biofield, which led to a whole bunch of academic insight into it, which was super helpful. But basically, I would say that your biofield is your body's electrical system. So we have electric current running through us all the time. And that's what makes us alive, is, what turns our light on is this electric current. Now, anytime you have an electric current, you have a magnetic field that surrounds it. And that's just a basic law of nature that we've observed. So the human body isn't any different. We have electric current running through us. We have a magnetic field that surrounds us. And we've been using the term biofield to describe the field and not necessarily the electricity in the body. And I see it as two sides of the same coin. Like, you can't separate the magnetic field from the electric current. And so even though it's not a common definition for my own use and based on my own observation, I see what we call the biofield as our body's electrical system in its totality. And basically what happens in disease or disorder is that this electrical system gets jammed up due to resistance, and this creates inflammation. And I think, it's sort of well recognized that inflammation is the root of disease. And so what the tuning forks do, okay, so here's just some very basic, again, sort of physics-based principles. So we work with the principles of resonance and entrainment, meaning that a tuning fork passing slowly through the magnetic field will encounter areas of resistance and charge. And anything that is present in the field is also present in the body. So initially, the tuning fork will resonate with this distortion, with this blockage. It will change in tone, just like the fellow with the sore shoulder and how it got sharp. So tones can change very dramatically in all different kinds of ways. They can go sharp, they can go flat, they can go very quiet. That sounds like the sound is being sucked up or absorbed. They can sound like they're full of static or noise. So there's a whole language of vibration that the tuning forks reveal. So it's like a kind of sonic braille that allows you to read the information in the field. So initially they will resonate with the distortion that allows us to be sort of diagnostic and finding areas. And then the tuning fork will entrain the body into a more coherent expression, because strong coherent signals will overtake weak incoherent signals. So So this is it's physics-based medicine as opposed to chemical-based medicine, with the idea that our body is an electroacoustic instrument and it goes out of tune. It goes out of tune due to resistance, due to accidents, due to injuries, due to bad thinking, difficult emotions, trauma. You know, if you have a guitar that you carry around your car and you throw around and you never tune it, it's going to sound awful. And that's really the state of most of our electrical systems, is that they're full of noise and resistance. And then because this is the blueprint of the body, if the signal and the blueprint is fuzzy or off or jammed up, it's going to make it very hard for the body to function properly. So in biofield tuning, we locate areas of noise and resistance in the magnetic field, and we just stay with them. And the tuning fork becomes kind of like a mirror. It reflects back to the body like, hey, you're running really wonky over here. You know, just like you don't know you have a poppy seed in your teeth until you look in the mirror, right? And the first thing that you do when you see it is take it out, right? And our body is the same way. When we hold up a mirror to the body and give it the opportunity to hear itself, it auto-tunes. It uses that input to correct itself, because we all have factory settings of harmony. The body knows what harmony is, but it doesn't necessarily know it's out of tune until it gets that reflection. So it's like a mirror. It reflects to the body what's going on. It's like a metronome, because it has a steady, coherent input that the body balances its own rhythms against. It has a particular tone to it, and the body uses that to balance its own tone. So it doesn't sound sharp or it doesn't sound flat. And then it just gets the resistance, whatever inflammation, whatever tension we've got in the body, to release and to let go. And so essentially what the whole process does, like the only claim that I really make here, is that it helps us to relax and to breathe more fully. Because all of these places where we're jammed up in our electrical system, breath isn't flowing, blood isn't flowing, lymph isn't flowing, there might be stagnation, all kinds of stuff going on in the system, where we're working with the underlying blueprint that's giving rise to that and helping to put that in order, and really just assisting the body in doing what it does already, which is fix itself.
Thanks, Eileen. I love the term sonic braille. That's really compelling and helpful in sort of imagining the process. Was there a singular moment in your progress in this healing art that you became aware of the importance of the broader field? So that is to say, 2, 4, 6 feet off the body and the information that's stored there, as opposed to that which is specifically held in the physical body and the immediate sort of, say, chakra system.
Yeah, and I was 10 years in, actually, because for 10 years I just did it as a hobby, and I would just hold the fork over the body, because what else was I going to do, you know? But then one day I accidentally discovered these areas of noise and resistance and volume change and pitch change in the field around the body. I was working with a woman who was complaining about the sense of pain and pulling and discomfort that she had in the left side of her neck and jaw and down into her shoulder. And she had been to see all different kinds of holistic providers, but nobody had been able to help her. And, you know, it was kind of a divine intervention kind of moment, I think, because a very strange thing happened. It was just all of kind of an odd circumstance where I was holding the fork over that part of her body. I was listening to it, trying to determine what was going on. And all of a sudden there was this really loud noise out my window. And so I walked across the room. I looked out the window. I didn't see anything. I mean, this day I have no idea what it was. But for whatever reason, I activated the tuning fork from about 6 feet away from her and just started walking towards her with the tuning fork activated. And much to my surprise, I hit like a spot where the tuning fork got loud. And I'd learned to associate these loud spots with places where there was just a lot of energy frozen. It was stuck. You know, this is whatever's going on in the body is going on in the field. So the field's kind of like an exploded view of the body. And magnetic fields guide and inform electric currents. So we're actually manipulating the way electricity is flowing in the body by manipulating the magnetic field, right? So that's what I ended up doing. I found this loud spot that, that I've been finding them over the body and moving them to the midline, but I didn't, obviously never found one 3 feet away from somebody. And I was sort of puzzled, the fork went through it, it got loud, it came out the other side, it got quiet. And I was like, wow, that's a loud spot right there. And so I went back to it and I was listening to it and wondering what to do. And I was like, well, I always bring loud spots to the midline, so I guess I'll just do that again. And the way that I do that is another kind of curious thing that I discovered at the beginning, that when I found these loud spots, I could actually click on them with the tuning fork and sort of intention, and then drag them and drop them. And so if it was loud over someone's shoulder, I would move it to the midline, and then it would feel like it got sucked into the body, and then it would be loud over the midline, and it wouldn't be loud over the shoulder anymore. And then people would be like, wow, I feel so much more centered and balanced. So I hooked into it, I clicked on it, I dragged it all the way to her neck, which felt very strange to do. And there was this feeling like it was sucked in, like that energy that I had just moved was like sucked into her body very dramatically. And the next day she called me and she said, Eileen, all of that pain and pulling is gone. I feel amazing. And I was like, wow, well, that's interesting. So from then on, everybody who came in, and I just was doing this as a hobby for years. I started exploring from 6 feet away. And what ended up happening, over the next 4 or 5 years was that I discovered that there was an actual anatomy and physiology to this terrain. And I started observing patterns in people, tonal patterns, rhythmic patterns, that were the same from person to person. Like everybody who came in, and I was hearing all of these sad tones off their left shoulder. The next person would come in, there's another sad tone, a sad story. And I started to realize that this was where all our memories were stored. That our memories, and my hypothesis is that our memories are actually stored in standing waves in the body's electrical system. And it makes sense when you think about it, because everything we see, smell, taste, touch, say, feel, experience is all translated into an electrical signal in the body. So it would make sense that our memories are stored in our electrical system, and it would make sense that this information is encoded magnetically and vibrationally in standing waves. And that's what I found. And I discovered that very specific memories were stored in very specific areas, and that every single emotion that we felt actually had like tonal equivalent in that sonic braille language of like sadness, for example. Like, how do we know when we're listening to a sad song that it's sad? Like, right, if the three of us were listening to a sad song together, I would say, Keith, Christabel, this song is sad. Because you'd be like, duh, Eileen, like we can tell this song is sad, right? So it's the same way with the tuning forks. When they encounter this information, they reflect the tonal expression of that emotion. We put names on everything. We become very like wordy, but really everything we feel is sort of tonal. It's rhythmic. It's got a musical quality to it. And this is what music seeks to capture, is this pure language of vibration. Tone, the vibrational experience that we're having. So it was that pattern recognition of like sad tone there, everybody's got the sad tone in that zone, everybody's got the angry tones in this zone, that after, and it definitely took a few years for the whole picture to emerge, but it's pretty complete now, the Biofield anatomy map, and we have thousands of students who work with it and find that they're able to locate trauma that people have experienced, figure out the year that it happened, because there's actually, so it's compartmentalized with different zones storing the record of the experiences of different emotions, but it's also timelined in that as we generate information, it moves away from our body, kind of like hair. As hair grows, right, it moves away from your body. So information I find at the outer boundary of the field, because the field is like a bubble. It's a torus with a central channel of spiraling energy down the middle. So I find information about gestation in that outer boundary. I find birth just inside of it. And it's kind of like dropping a needle on an album and reading the vibrational record of someone's life. So if somebody is 60, I'm going to find memories that were generated when they were 30, about 3 feet away from their body. And this is extremely consistent. Even people who've just had training can go and like find these different areas of trauma, identify them within a year or two. And some people, depending on how sensitive people are, can actually read the whole story. Everybody has sort of different levels of perception. Some people just feel the resistance and can kind of tell that the tone is wrong. But other people who are more, quote, psychic, if you will, can actually discern large amounts. And I think it also depends on the day and the phases of the moon and the positions of the stars, right? Because anybody who's a practitioner knows that there's some days where you just have more insight than others too.
So there's been this rather developed mapping you've made in all of the studies you've done, and I'm really encouraged by practitioners such as yourself who have gone from, I don't know if it's an appropriate word, but a non-believer or a person who doesn't have a particular expectation of what something is, and then discovering piece by piece for practical purposes what is going on in this whole body-mind relationship and in this whole body-field relationship. And it's really interesting, the tree rings as you're describing, or that the outer field is earlier experience that people are having, and so on and so forth. Now, you used the term earlier that the field is the blueprint. What do you say to people? Because our conception of the body is that everything's contained just at the edge of the skin. But we're looking into the science of the field, and you use this term, the blueprint. In field dynamics, for instance, we like to call it like a field first model, or this idea that somehow the body is actually inside of the field, and that the way that the body grows may even be understood as growing on a kind of energetic architecture or an information architecture within the field. What do you say to this important concept in energy healing, energy work, and in considering this gap in science and spirituality, different belief systems around the relationship between the body and the field?
There's a lot here, right? Because current medical model really doesn't see how the mind affects the body. The body's treated sort of like as a meat machine. I had a friend who was married to an alcoholic and had numerous difficult incidences with him, and then had one that was incredibly difficult where he put the children in danger, and she ended up having a massive panic attack and went to the emergency room, and they ran all kinds of tests on her and poked and prodded her and all this, and nobody once asked her what was going on in her life. Nobody said, what's happening? How are you? How's your state? Like, there was no curiosity about what was going on in her mind at all. And yet it was absolutely a mental and emotional and electrical response to stress. So we have a long way to go, I think, to really understand the body-mind connection. But in the Biofield anatomy model, the body is inside the mind. And anywhere the mind goes out of balance, the body follows. The body follows. So I've just seen firsthand over and over again, finding distortions, imbalances within the field and seeing very clearly, right? Remember, magnetic fields guide and inform electric currents. So if you have a tendency to always overthink and overdo and are continually projecting yourself into the future, fussing about your to-do lists and whatnot, you're throwing your field out of balance in the region of the right hip. So virtually every client I've ever treated who has had physical issues in their right hip, pain in their right hip, has had this mental and tendency, right? So the mind is, if the magnetic field is guiding the electric current, if you're running a whole bunch of energy in that part of your mind, you're going to draw more electricity to that area. And so people end up, pain is too much voltage running through your wires. That's one of the ways that happens. This inflammation response is because you've got this magnetic clump of activity off of your right hip. Like, thinking doesn't just happen in the brain and in the head. It happens in our whole body. And that's what the Biofield anatomy map really reveals, is this very entwined body-mind relationship. Another example, almost everybody I've treated with right ankle or right foot issues is or recently was dithering. Do I do this? Do I do that? Do I set my foot here? Do I make this choice? Do I make this decision? And that kind of going back and forth in your mind creates a weakness in the field around your right foot, making you more prone to injuries or accidents in that area. So this model shows us beyond a shadow of a doubt over and over and over again that a balanced, centered, calm mind yields a body that is like that. And that anywhere where we're off the hook, and if we're really off the hook, we're going to see dramatic issues in the body because the whole blueprint is out of whack.
This is fascinating, Eileen. You've mentioned in tuning the human biofield that when working as a practitioner, often the more intelligent a person is, the more elaborate their defenses, their sort of armored psychology or physiology. I'm fascinated by this concept because we have clients often referring to how they're blocking or shielding, verbally, that they're blocking or shielding a process without necessarily understanding exactly how they're doing that when they're pressed. So it seems to relate very much to what you're saying.
Absolutely. And, the thing is that these defenses were put in place, most of them under the age of 7. And so we don't really have any cognitive connection to the very complex work that we did as children in order to protect ourselves. So one of the things that I've observed is especially the more intelligent, the more clever someone is, the more they've hidden their true self, the more that they have, boxes within boxes within boxes, where they've really squirreled themselves away. And it's a real archaeological dig to get back to that vulnerable, authentic, true self.
So Eileen, a core concept in electric wellness in your most recent book is voltage. And you say that the stronger the voltage, the more energy moving through our energy system and physical body, right? And then conversely, the lower the voltage, there's not enough energy moving through the body. And then that's what essentially is leading to disease. And you say that overall, your body basically is a battery or can be seen as a battery. Now, this is a really provocative lens to look through in determining health or even seeing through that lens as health, maybe even something like a new paradigm. So what do you think about this particular referential point as your body is a battery, more voltage, less voltage, more health, less health? Is it that simple? What are your comments there?
Well, I like to break things down into their most simple elements. It's, I'm always looking for the simplest, easiest, most direct, most logical kind of way to approach anything. Voltage is the same idea as pH. pH refers to the amount of electricity in the system. And so low pH is the same thing as low voltage. And this is something that I got from Dr. Jerry Tennant. I was reading his book, Healing is Voltage, and I came across that passage and I was like, this is like the keystone of translation. Whereas if you just think electrically, you're like, okay, my battery is low. Like that's what's going on. You have low pH, you have low voltage, you have a low battery, and your body doesn't have the essential energy that it needs to do everything that needs to be done. So one of the things that I ask people is on a scale of 1 to 100, where is your battery meter at in this moment? People always seem to have a number come to mind. So anybody's listening, like check in, what's your battery meter at? Where do you feel it? Now, a lot of people end up in the 60 range, which I find really interesting. But can you imagine if you have a manufacturing business that has 100 employees and only 60 of them are showing up to work every day? Like what's going on is not smooth. It's not easy. It's stressful. Things are not getting done, right? So you end up with all kinds of backlog. And so the idea that when we have sufficient voltage across all our cell membranes running through our system, part of having sufficient voltage is not having resistance in the system, right? Because it's all these areas where we have resistance that jams up flow. And voltage is related to the strength of the current of the flow, right? So if you've got all these places that are jammed up, that's going to stop the voltage, the strength of that current. And so this is why we work to find and release these areas of resistance from the electrical signal, because anything that has been frozen is not contributing to the strength of the overall system. It's frozen, it's locked up, it's not flowing. And so by liberating these frozen areas back into flow, people's overall energy level goes up. And when you got high energy, you're clear, you're focused, you're fun, you're ticking things off your to-do list, you're keeping your spaces clean, you're having a good time in life. And when we're tired, our quality of life diminishes tremendously. And then because the body isn't getting enough juice to run all its systems, the body starts to break down. So I think that when we start to think electrically, because if you think about raising your pH, right? Like that's kind of limited in what your options are. Certainly the first go-to for most people is diet. But I personally have never been a fan of vegetables. So, me raising my pH is not going to happen through sitting down and eating mounds of vegetables every day. I just won't do it, So how else am I going to raise my pH? Well, it turns out that there's so many ways that you can raise your voltage. There's so many ways, and they're pretty much all free too. The primary one being through our breath. And it turns out that the oxygen molecule has all these free electrons. And when we breathe in oxygen, these electrons are binding magnetically to the hemoglobin in our blood. And it's this electricity that is in the air that is being dropped off at our cells. Why blood turns from sort of blue to this bright red is because it's got light in it. It's got electric juice. So we can go for months without food. Plenty of people have done that, days without liquids. We can only go a few minutes without breath. So our primary source of life itself, of the electric juice that we run on that keeps us alive, is coming from our breath.
Interesting that you're getting to the blood as well, because in traditional Chinese medicine, we have qi as its word for energy, and they would say densest qi is blood, right? So it's almost like the energy densified into the physical is most essentialized in the blood and the body. Interesting to make that connection based on what you just said. I'm interested in just switching over into the kinds of practitioners and the people attracted to this kind of work, and using this pivot from voltage to vibration. And you said in your book that raising your voltage is not raising your vibration. So can you explain the difference between the two?
Sure. Well, as a sound researcher, but also as a writer, I'm really particular about words. I pay attention. I pay attention to what people say, how they say it, the tone that they use, and how different words or concepts act in our body. And so when we talk about raising our vibration, there's a few things that are going on. One is the assumption that high vibrations are somehow better than low vibrations, which is kind of a strange thing. I mean, we need low vibrations, we need delta to sleep and to rest. When our brain starts going up into higher brainwave states, into the beta brainwave state, sometimes that's overthinking, fussing, that sort of thing, right? Where we would actually want to lower the frequency of our brainwaves in order to become more chill. And then the whole idea about bass tones, actually speaking about blood, the work of John Stuart Reid with his simoscope, one of the things that he observed is that, and this is known in other ways too, that bass tones cause our blood to uptake more oxygen. So part of what's happening with the beat of the heart is the beat of the heart is causing this uptake. But when we listen to low bass tones, it also augments that process. But what I've really found is that when we become healthier, when our voltage goes up, we actually expand in every direction. So why would we want to limit ourselves to just one plane of movement when we have the liberty to move out expansively and radiantly in every direction? The other thing is that I find that we want to get our vibration like in tune, where we're the best version of ourselves. And that is from descending into the body, from really occupying our body with all of our consciousness. A lot of people who've been exposed to trauma disassociate, and the whole movement within the body is up and out. So this whole idea of raising our vibration or ascending is playing into that pattern that is pulling us up and out of 3D reality right here, right now, having the experience of being a human on planet Earth. And that's not the direction we want to go. Like, you can go not have a body, like that's probably where we were before we had a body. Like the whole point of having a human incarnation is to experience ourselves as human. And that means being grounded and being present and being real and not trying to vibrate higher away from all of this unpleasantness. Like that's a real bypass kind of thinking. Whereas if you say, I'm in tune and expansive and strong, like that's a very different experience in your body. So I just think that this whole idea of raising your vibration, it's sort of like it's a blind alley. It doesn't get you to where you want to go. You want to get your vibration in tune, and you want to expand your consciousness in every direction.
You just briefly mentioned trauma healing. You refer to phenomena such as information pockets and walls in people's fields, which is something Keith and I can both relate to in terms of reading the field of an individual as a practitioner in a therapeutic sense. You also mentioned frozen areas, but just specifically referring to the trauma healing, as I understand it, trauma is producing what you've referred to as pathological oscillations in the biofield, causing a breakdown in the order and the structure of the body. And I just wondered if you could share a little more with us about that.
Sure. Well, any kind of traumatic input that we experience, we have that feeling of going through that trauma, of being beaten or, whatever kind of horrible thing we've experienced. It doesn't go away. Like it lives on in your electrical system, just like your memories do. And because it's in your field, it becomes part of the lens through which you experience life. So early trauma often leads to repeated trauma because of this tendency for patterns to repeat. However, the patterns can be located, the memories, the inputs, they can be identified, and they can be modulated to a degree. So on a certain level, we're indelibly impressed by life. Like there's no erasing your experience. But on another level in the field, we can settle down the charge and the intensity of these memories. We can pinpoint very specific incidences and go stick a fork in them, and then let the body use that input to modulate that so that it's not as dramatic, so that it's not as intense, so that it's not as charged. Right? So essentially what we do is we discharge these areas. And so by enabling the body to relax and to release those tangles, to let them settle down into a more coherent expression, then allows that light, those photons, to decouple from that tangle and then can be guided back into circulation. And what I've found is that all of these places where we have tangles, you can look at it as healing trauma. But I've come to see it as accessing potential. This is like, it's lead, it's frozen, it's stuck, it's heavy, it's baggage, it's whatever. But it's also gold, light, pure juice, voltage, energy, you. And all of these parts of you that you lost along the way can be returned to you. They can be returned to you. So many people feel like they have all of this potential inside of them, but they can't access it. And honestly, the more trauma people have had, if they're able to get to the resources to heal, they kind of become like superheroes because they had to live such a significant portion of their life with so much of themselves offline, frozen, stuck, still in that trauma. And when those bits of you start coming back, it's stronger now than if you had never lost it.
Right. And so in this way, the challenges in one's life are actually potentially their greatest gifts.
Exactly. Yeah. If you can get a hold of real healing.
Right. And so what would you say, you work with a lot of people, what would you say is the primary stumbling block or hurdle for people to really get going into deeper work?
So fear is one. There's sort of this sense of, oh, I don't want to go there. But you already went through it once, and you're bigger and older now. So, you survived it once, and it's never as bad as you're afraid it's going to be. When we go in and we retrieve and activate these memories, sometimes people can get upset, they can cry, they can moan, they can scream, they can really kind of go through it. But then you come out the other side and you're like, wow, actually that wasn't so bad. That thing that I've been avoiding, confronting or feeling or dealing with, now that I've done it, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And I feel so much better now. Finding help. I mean, unfortunately, when people go to doctors, all they get is pills, and that doesn't fix the underlying issue. There's a whole bunch of different whole health offerings out there. And, how do you find somebody who can really help you to heal? So that's one. Being in denial, and being stubborn and stuck, that will also get in your way. Sometimes people really have to hit a certain kind of bottom in order to move in the direction of reclaiming their wholeness.
And speaking of these kinds of hurdles, just on a personal note, I'm wondering, is there anything that comes to you that you might share with the listeners around your personal healing experience that was particularly pivotal to you or seems to be relevant in this moment?
Well, I think what was probably the most pivotal was when I finally started training people to do biofield tuning and actually receive the work myself. Because I started doing the work in 1996 and it didn't train anybody until 2010. So for 14 years, I was helping people to feel better, get out of pain, deal with their problems, become more creative, all this stuff. But meanwhile, I was suffering from chronic mid-back pain, addiction to struggle, poverty consciousness, a stormy marriage, a lot of debt, and not for lack of trying for it to be different. Since 1987, since I was 18, I've been trying to heal myself and, did Tony Robbins firewalks and all kinds of body work and all kinds of therapy, all kinds of courses. But I was still stuck, overweight, broke, and miserable. And none of those things that had promised me that I could get out of that had worked for me. But when I started getting tuned, things started to change immediately. And the combination of receiving tuning, because I was extremely compartmentalized, like I had an aspect of me that was very together, very on it, but then I had this whole sort of half-dead corpse that I was dragging along with me. That had been very traumatized in childhood for a whole bunch of different reasons. And none of the body work, I mean, it had done some, like I went through a course of Rolfing and that had been helpful. But it wasn't until I started understanding plasma, the fourth state of matter. This all happened in 2010. Like I didn't even learn about plasma as a state of matter in school. We were talking about solid, liquid, and gas. And then I discovered that there's this whole illuminated, connecting state of matter called plasma that's everywhere, part of everything. And oh my God, the whole world around me, like everything is electric and my body is electric. So it was those two things that really changed. That was the pivot, was 2010. And, in the years that have followed, I guess 12 years now, at this point, I've received thousands of sessions. I've conducted many thousands of sessions. I've conducted lots and lots of group sessions that I've put myself in. So I've availed myself to that. And most recently, I got a new tuning fork that I created that is 144 hertz. It's an unweighted tuning fork that's such a powerhouse. It really, if anybody has any skepticism that there's stuff going on in the field, just sit in a room with me and watch a session with this 144 because it changes, the tone changes so dramatically. And works very, very deeply with the integrity of the system, really reveals where there are structural misalignments on a physical, mental, and emotional level, and gets them really right back in order. And so I've actually been working on myself. I've been tuning myself regularly and just found it to be super helpful. Gotten a lot of insights and made, continual progress. I think that healing is holding, accessing our potential, is really a lifelong process. I don't think that it's a sort of thing, it's a lifestyle, right? So I know that there's always more potential to access, better version of me that exists. And so I'm continually fine-tuning my system on every level for that optimization to maintain that high voltage and high performance, which is, I think, what everybody wants. Everybody wants to be the best version of themselves, and it's in there and it's possible to access. I feel like I've been able to do that with me, and all of the things that I was struggling with in 2010 are gone. I don't have any pain. I don't have any debt. I don't have hardly any drama, in my family like I did. It's life is very, very different now, and I'm much, much, much more free. And I think that that's what it's really all about, is becoming free.
It's very inspiring, Eileen, to hear you share those sentiments and those thoughts, particularly about healing being such a journey. You've achieved a huge amount in your professional life thus far, your personal life, your professional, and in the body of wisdom you've developed and shared with so many people with Biofield Tuning. Are there any stones unturned? Is there any particular goal or ambition that you're looking to in the coming years?
Oh, many, many. Because I'm an ideas person, and I'm creative, and I'm curious, and so there's always endless stones unturned. But what's coming up in the next couple of months is I obtained a cymoscope from John Stuart Reed. And what a cymoscope does is it's a dish of water that has a speaker underneath it and a camera above it. And as you play different frequencies into the dish of water, different cymatic patterns form. And so I'm very interested in seeing all different kinds of things. I want to see what the pattern of every single frequency I can generate looks like. I'm curious how that relates to the cymatic windows in ancient old world cathedrals. There's very interesting stuff going on with cymatics, and the idea that those buildings and the organs and the bells were actually instruments of healing themselves. So I'm curious about that. I'm curious what a tuning fork vibration will look like when it's resonating with something that's out of integrity, and then once that shifts and it's back in integrity, like, will we be able to see that in a cymoglyph? I'm also setting up a recording studio with high quality microphones and software and all that, and that's something that I've wanted for years and years. When I do these recorded sessions that I make, I've always done them on my laptop, and the audio quality isn't that great. And now that I have this new fork that's so demonstrative in its overtones and undertones, and I'm going to have really good quality microphones, I'm going to be creating, really high def, interesting sessions that will probably also have a cymatic video that will go along with them. So I'm basically setting up a sound lab, and I'm very curious to see what I discover with that. So that's the next step.
Oh, it's fascinating and exciting. And speaking of future-oriented things, maybe as we draw this to a close, I'm wondering, given that you're so abreast of things around this gap between science and spirituality and the limitations of the current models that we have right now to explain the phenomena we experience in life, what are you seeing as a promise in the coming years or even decades to a different kind of relationship to healing, whether that be technology or culture, or what are you seeing happen in the next 10, 20 years or so as we move into the, deep into the 21st century?
I think that people are definitely going to embrace this model. This is something that's really dawning, this sort of bioelectric model of life, this vibrational or waves look at health, physics-based, informational-based healing as opposed to chemical-based healing. Certainly, advances in technology will help that to be more accepted. I always felt like if I could create a device that would visualize what the tuning forks sort of make audibly visible, audible, would be really helpful. I recently learned that there's a company that has created prototypes, sensors that may be able to sense the edge of the field. And this is something that I have really wanted to do for a long time, but it hasn't happened yet. Because what I sense, and practitioners learn to as well, is that the outer boundary of the biofield has a greater electrical charge than what's in it, right? And you think about, the skin of the apple has more nutrients. It's the sort of skin of the bubble has more electrical charge, and it has more resistance and more density. And so when you bump up against it with a fork, you can feel it. And you can also discover it with dowsing rods too, for example. So if we could use some kind of technology that demonstrated this charge differential, it would support the whole model of the electrical system being toroidal shaped. I think that would go a long way. So I think that's in the pipeline. Certainly studies. We have a study that we conducted last year where we had 15 volunteers who all received 3 biofield tuning sessions at a distance, 1 a week for 3 weeks. And all of them came into the study with clinical anxiety. We were studying anxiety, and every single one of them left the study without clinical anxiety. We saw very, very dramatic changes in these people's inner experiences of themselves. And so that's being submitted for peer review this month. And we hope to, we don't hope to, we're planning on doing a follow-up study with a control group and additional people. So that's the mission of my institute, my nonprofit, is to just keep on doing research and publishing it to help to move this field along. So, and I'm not the only one. There's so many people who have been creating, there's so many devices out there at this point, vibrational devices, beds, chairs. This is the reason why sound healing is becoming big is because it works. It's because it changes your state, whether it's regardless of the approach, people are finding that sound impacts them, and that even these biofield therapies like therapeutic touch or pranic healing, there's more and more validation of this coming forward. I think that we just need to get over this hump and this idea that, what's the energy in energy medicine? It's sort of like, the biofield is subtle and then therefore it doesn't exist. Like, to me, the energy in energy medicine is electricity. Like, what we call chi is electricity. Like, it's the same thing. Chi, positive and negative, flows through the body, and it's the same thing. Like, the understanding in Chinese medicine of chi is more nuanced, certainly, and subtle than the idea of electricity, but it's still the same thing. So I think we just need to demystify the whole thing. What's happening in Reiki? Well, areas where there's greater electrical charge flow, area of lesser electrical charge. And somebody's putting your hand on her body. There's nothing mystical going on. It's just the flow of electricity. This is all describable and understandable by laws of nature that we already know. So once we get over this hump and people are like, oh, okay, the energy in energy medicine is electricity and it follows all these laws of electricity, then we can just get on with healing people in this way and get over the artificially produced misunderstanding of it generated by the American Medical Association, quite frankly.
What a future that will be. We're very much looking forward to it, Eileen. We should mention your website, of course, your primary website. You mentioned the Institute, but the primary website being biofieldtuning.com. And of course, the trainings, which I believe are happening both virtually and in person at this point. Is that right?
No, we're just teaching virtually. 2020 made us take our whole program online. And, we have limited resources, limited teachers, and the online program ended up being so successful that we have yet to schedule any in-person classes and might not until 2023. But certainly you can learn biofield tuning, become certified in it from the comfort of your own home, pretty much anywhere in the world. So I think classes are popular and I think we're currently sold out, but we are always adding more. So keep checking back.
Eileen, it's been a pleasure to speak to you today. I'm sure many people listening to this have been greatly informed, and your wisdom and insights and experience are really, really illuminating. And overall, I'm really immediately saying there is this big paradigm shift taking place that you described so eloquently. This movement from chemical based to electrical based, and from chemistry to physics. And it's just a beautiful way to sum up the work you're doing, in a sense, and really appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great to see you guys. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. You can find us at fielddynamicshealing.com.